For professional advice with a personal touch, consult Fuller Landau, Chartered Professional Accountants and Business Advisors. Click on flmontreal.com.
Coming up to 7:06 on today's Entrepreneur, a program about the entrepreneurial spirit that drives Quebec business. My name is Dan Delmar, along with Fuller Landau's Josh Miller. Good evening, Josh.
Hello, Dan.
And it's our last episode of the season tonight.
It is, and I'm glad to see you back in your chair. Last week was an interesting, fun episode or fun show, but happy to see you back in your chair.
I'm happy to be here. How did it go with Mike Newton the last time around? Your first time hosting solo, I think, in 6 years. That was the first time, right?
In just about 6 years, it was. I guess I somewhat managed okay. I didn't hear much afterwards, or not bad afterwards anyways.
Sounded great in the car anyway, so thanks for filling in for me, Josh. And we'll get to our guests this week, Bridget Fetterly and Paolo Bassi of Kane and Fetterly, of course, very familiar to our audience here at CJAD. They're coming up, but first a look at some of the entrepreneurial news in the headlines in the past week. And let's try with this story, which I think is kind of interesting because we're seeing the decline of retail in Montreal. We've been talking about it all year long. I mean, it seems like this year has been pretty bad, and the city is catching on to this. So we're seeing they're throwing some money at streets like Prince Arthur, for example. Now we have news of a larger program that's going to be about worth $40 million, and they're going to give money to entrepreneurs to renovate their facades outside, beautify commercial districts, things like that. Is the retail landscape, Josh, getting so bad that we really need government to intervene at this point?
Well, certainly everybody will always take a helping hand when they need it, especially when it comes with dollars. And the City of Montreal is bringing back their PRAM program. That was certainly to help storefronts and businesses, probably more so in the softer months than anything else, but every dollar will help. And the reality is there's so much, you always hear about the construction. People kind of want to sometimes avoid going downtown or avoiding going to some of the more touristy areas and places that are usually quite magnificent, that are maybe with a few less people because it's that much harder to get to. So I believe the city recognizes that. I believe the mayor and the different boroughs recognize and listen to some degree anyways to the merchants and the retailers and the business owners, and they are trying to make a difference. It can't be all about take. They do have to give a little bit back, and the reality is that they give back in the right places, it should multiply for them. It should create profits. It should create businesses that will grow, and ultimately businesses that will be able to pay the taxes and everything else that gets to support this Montreal network.
Why do you think there's so many empty storefronts lately on streets like Saint Laurent, Saint Catherine, Saint Denis?
Listen, I think there is definitely, we're in an era where people are thinking about where they're spending their dollars, and they're not spending it everywhere or as loosely as they used to. Now, I still believe to this day that Montreal and Quebec to a degree is a bit of a microclimate when it comes to the economy. People will still shop and you'll still see people walking around with bags, but they just might be a little bit more discerning. We are a fashion-forward community, notwithstanding what I wear on a day-to-day basis, but we won't go there. And I think that if it's fresh and it's new and it's not Georgia Southern, but it's Paris European, and it's the right style. And I think that's what does great in Montreal. And if it continues to be fresh and it continues to be fashion forward, then the consumers will go back in. And of course, as we keep saying from week to week or periodically, if there's a reason for the consumer to go into the store, if they answer that why would you come in, whether it's a socioeconomic reason or a social responsibility, well, that's even more of a reason to go in.
Well, hopefully creating more beautiful shopping districts and more pleasant ways to shop will help out with that. So we'll have to see how that goes. We had some bad news with the departure of Target from Canada, but Walmart is generously stepping in and going to take over many of the various locations that the Target left behind in Quebec.
And listen, this is a case of picking up an opportunity. The Target, obviously they made their decision. They left town, so to speak, and there are some great opportunities. Real estate in Montreal is still fairly cheap, if you will. There's some great areas. There's still room for growth, and I think Walmart, with its deep pockets, and I would say they're pretty good and pretty shrewd as far as their retail locations go. They're picking up the right spots, and they can afford it, and they're a brand, and they, at the end of the day, the difference between Walmart and Target, at least in this part of the world, is that they understand the market, where Target didn't necessarily understand the market. So can Walmart pick up these locations, understand the market, and do even better? Most probably.
That includes the location in Point Claire, by the way. Another one out west in Candiac, going to turn into Walmart as well. What advice would you have for Walmart in terms of understanding the Quebec or Canadian markets better than Target?
It's really tough to give Walmart advice, especially when they're doing so well in an area already. It's as you would give any retailer. It's know your audience, know your target, know your customer, but know your customer in your own backyard. Don't know them worldwide. Don't know them globally, although you can, and you attract them because, online and the internet reaches global, but know them in your own backyard. You don't have to merchandise in Montreal the same way you merchandise in South Dakota. You don't merchandise here in Montreal the same way you would merchandise in Eastern Europe. So there's certainly knowing your customer in your own backyard is what any retailer has to do. There's no question about it. And being opportunistic and taking advantage of certain times where, in these cases, picking up some premises that Target left behind, that's really a lesson for any and every entrepreneur, is when the time comes, when there's opportunistic moments, take advantage of them. Don't be short-sighted and jump when you can, because it doesn't happen every day.
So Quebec has some interesting business laws, and this one is pretty different, which regulates franchises. So it's a court case involving Dunkin' Donuts and a franchisee who felt that they were basically abandoned by Dunkin' Donuts, and so they're suing. And apparently, Josh, there's a Quebec law that stipulates, I guess, beyond the franchisee agreement, that the franchise company has to support the franchisee, or at least make sure that they are healthy over the long term. Can you explain this kind of strange law to us?
Well, I won't play lawyer today, but certainly based on the article, and most people know that the Quebec legal system is different from the rest of Canada. And most people, of course, are fully aware that the Quebec economy really focuses on the individual, the employee, the little guy, being as socialistic as it is. And in this case, it really follows that line of thinking. You have Dunkin' Donuts franchisees that had to shut their doors, or will ultimately shut their doors. Nobody sees Dunkin' Donuts around anymore. And they went to court saying, you know what? We bought a franchisee. We bought a product, a service, a name, a brand that the franchisor didn't support enough. We failed not because, we didn't do the right job in running the franchise. We failed because there wasn't enough big support on your end. There wasn't enough of the push, of the marketing, of the development of product, of the fighting, the competition. And I have to actually believe that they're somewhat correct in that. Now, are these franchisees, a little bit short-sighted that they don't see the competition and where it's ultimately heading? I'm sure there's a little bit of blame on that end too, and they're kind of hoping that they're going to win from the big fish that they take to court. But there's no doubt that the franchisor, and in any case, you'll see many franchisor, their job is to make sure that their brand stays at the top of the game, and it just didn't happen with Dunkin' Donuts.
And finally, the co-founder of BlackBerry, Jim Balsillie, our hero. He now
your hero.
Well,
I like the product, but hey,
I like the product too. It's so far so good. But he says that Canadians have the power to innovate. We just don't have the power to actually win these big battles, like in the smartphone market, for example. Do you think he has a point to that? And what could the government be doing more to encourage innovation?
I think I'll answer your first question first, and I think Canada, we have to recognize we're a huge country. Land mass is monstrous. But we're such a small business community by comparison to everywhere else. We'd be foolish to think that we carry this huge business power on a worldwide scale. And I think that's what he's essentially saying. He's saying, Canada, you're small potatoes. If somebody wants to come in and crush you, they're going to come in and crush you. There's so many large U.S. companies, European companies, Chinese companies. So that's just it. Now, what can government do to help? I think they're trying to do things in their own way, but there's only so much that any government can do to protect from outside the borders. It's just not possible.
Today's Entrepreneur on CJAD. Coming up next, Bridget Fetterly and Paolo Bassi of Kane and Fetterly, our last profile of the season on Today's Entrepreneur at 7:15. Inspiring stories from outstanding business people. Dan Delmar and Fuller Landau's Josh Miller with you on Today's Entrepreneur for our last episode of the season. And our profile this evening, Josh, a family business that is very, very well known to CJAD's audience. They've been advertising on CJAD for well over a quarter century now. Bridget Fetterly and Paolo Bassi are here of Kane and Fetterly Funeral Home in NDG. Bridget, Paolo, welcome to CJAD.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having us.
So everyone knows your business, but the standard question is just tell us a little bit about Kane and Fetterly, how long you've been in business, and well, I guess we know what you do, but tell us about why you do it differently, maybe.
Okay, so we're a full-service funeral home. So we're there for families before the funeral, during the funeral, and after the funeral. We do for before the funeral, we'll be helping people with their prearrangements, so planning their funeral wishes before the funeral takes place. We're also wanting to educate people, so we do a lot of seminars in the community to help people make wise decisions. Obviously, during the funeral, we're there for them to help them if they have cremation wishes, burial wishes, if they want to be repatriated back to their homes. So we do all of that. And after the funeral, we're there to help them with the paperwork and if they need grief counseling and just help the process go a lot smoother for them. We're not there to settle estates, but we're there to get them organized so they're able to settle the estate.
It sounds, it's very complete. It's an A to Z kind of service offering. In your history, Kane and Fetterly has been around 50 years. We hear
right.
the ad
We're
all the
celebrating
time.
50 years. Yes.
Happy birthday!
Thank you.
Thank you.
And has it always been such a huge realm of services, or has that developed over the years?
I have to say in the past, I would say funeral homes were more order takers. We really dealt with the family would come in and we, go to church, have the service in the funeral home, choose the casket, and that was about it. Now it's a completely different ball game. We're event planners is what we are. And we're very happy to be in that shoe because it's more creative. We're there to make a good experience for the family and to do whatever they want to see happen as long as it's legal.
Did you, Paolo, you wanted to add to that?
Yes, and also I have to say that the way we interact with people, with families, with the consumer has changed over the years, also because of the internet revolution. And what happens, the decision maker is before even they think of calling us, they are on the web seeking for information. So it's important to be prepared and offer useful information before they approach us. So that's why one of the missions we have, like Bridget said, is to educate the people before they even approach the funeral home.
And there's no doubt it's a difficult time at the best of circumstances. So your presence and your education is huge. So when we come back from the break, we'll take it back, the 50 years or maybe not that long, but maybe, and figure out, what happened at the beginning and your first few days on the job.
Bridget Fetterly and Paolo Bassi of Kane and Fetterly with us this evening on Today's Entrepreneur. Back on Today's Entrepreneur with Bridget Fetterly and Paolo Bassi of Kane and Fetterly Funeral Homes in NDG, an institution, Josh, that's been there for decades and certainly part of the CJD family here for a while. Let's talk about the other part of the business, actually, Kane and Fetterly. So we know the Fetterly obviously comes from your family, Bridget, but where does the Kane come from?
Well, my father was actually a second generation funeral director, so I'm the third generation. And his father had two funeral homes, one in Point St. Charles, and that's where my father grew up, and another one on the lakeshore. My grandfather sold his businesses, and my father then purchased Kane and Fetterly. At the time it was called Thomas Kane Funeral Home. He purchased it from Mr. Kane in 1965. He decided to keep the Kane name because people already knew Thomas Kane in the community. He had a good reputation, and my father was basically starting from scratch. So that's how that came about, but they actually never worked together.
Now, when did you enter the business?
Well, that was a surprise because I actually never studied to be in this type of business. It was a second career for me. I was a graduate of art history from McGill, and then I went on to get another degree in interior design, and so I was on a total different path. When my father decided to expand his business and renovate it, I jumped in to help him with that. At the time, he had a girl going back to school to study psychology, so I asked if I could maybe work for the year while she was away, and she never came back, and I enjoyed the business, so I stayed on.
Now, your father had been doing this for many years. You came from a completely different background. Your styles must have been a little bit different.
Oh, completely different. I was definitely the more creative one, less business-like. Well, my father had all the business experience, but it worked well together.
Now, did you work side by side for a number of years, or at what point did kind of the shift go from him to you?
So I joined around 93, 94, and my father passed away in 98. So I did work with him for a few years, but then quickly, took over.
Now, he passed away, I presume, a little bit premature, like you weren't necessarily expecting it. So you had to fill certain shoes pretty quickly.
Yes. With no business experience, I was pretending I had it for a couple of years after he had passed away. But thankfully, I was surrounded by a very good team. Have to say, our employees have been with us for many years, and I went from employee to boss overnight. And the employees really helped me out, and I'm very grateful to them.
Did you find you had to gain a new level of respect going from employee to boss? Was that difficult at any stretch, or they were just really a compassionate group and figured it out?
They were an extremely compassionate group. I think it was more myself that was struggling. I was struggling with whether or not I had the competence to do this. Also, what we didn't say is that I did get married in 97, just a year before my father passed away, and my husband joined the team, and he had more business experience than I did because he worked in marketing in the textile industry in Italy, and so he was able to help with that aspect of the business.
It's difficult taking over a business under normal circumstances, but this is a very specific business, very sensitive business, obviously, when it comes to clients. With taking over a funeral home, what were some of the biggest challenges you think when you took over? Is it the interaction with customers that has to be extra sensitive? Some of the technicalities of the business? What was the most difficult?
For myself, it came to me naturally to be with the families. We often say, Paolo and I are a husband and wife team in this business. I'm more affective and he's more effective. And so that's why it works well together. So I didn't have any challenges in terms of being with the families. That comes to me very naturally. But in terms of being effective, that's where my challenge was. But I depended on my husband to help me out with that.
And it's certainly, husband and wife working together is not always easy, but it seems to work out well. So when we come back after the break, we'll hear from Paolo and his experience as he first came into the business.
Bridget Fetterly and Paolo Bassi of Kane and Fetterly Funeral Homes are profiled this evening on today's Entrepreneur, last edition of the season at 7:30. Welcome back to Today's Entrepreneur, presented by Fuller Landau, a program about the entrepreneurial spirit that drives Quebec business. My name is Dan Delmar, along with Fuller Landau's Josh Miller, on our final episode of the season. We're back in September here on CJAD, but our final profile of some amazing Montreal entrepreneurs, and this evening, some names that are familiar perhaps to our CJAD audience. They've been an advertiser here for decades now on the station. Bridget Fetterly and Paolo Bassi of Kane and Fetterly Funeral Homes, of course, located on Sherbrooke and NDG. Bridget, Paolo...
Just to let you know, it's located on DeCarry.
DeCarry
and Isabella.
I'm sorry about that.
Other funeral home.
I'm thinking of another one. Sorry about that, Bridget. But tell me first, terribly sorry about the confusion, but it is a very serious business, of course. It's a very touchy business when it comes to clients. Do you ever have do you find that the time during the day away from clients to laugh a little bit, take things more lightly?
Well, we certainly do, and I think we consider ourselves normal people. We have a job where the emotional involvement is big part of our work, but maybe that's why we need to laugh and try to have fun together with friends, like everybody does.
Now, Paolo, you came from Italy. You know, right just before that Bridget's father passed away.
Yes.
What were some of the biggest challenges for you in not only in this new marital relationship? I don't want to go there, so you don't have to. Please don't go there. But certainly getting into the business, working side by side with your wife in a brand new domain. It wasn't textiles. It wasn't. Tell us briefly about that.
I had a few challenges. First, I had the personal challenges. I mean. First of all, languages. The language was a barrier, and in Quebec, then you have two languages, so which I didn't find fair because you have to learn double. Then was a challenge even at the beginning to find my way around the city, and then the professional challenges. I had some business background experience in Italy, but was in a different domain. So one of the big challenges was also to gain acceptance and respect from the employees, because I was coming from a different country, not much experience, and our employees were working in the industry, have been working for many years. So that was challenging, and I think I was able to overcome my challenges with hard work, dedication to the family business. And also when I started was 98 and 99, so we were at the dawning of the internet revolution, and I was self-taught, and I built the first website of the company. So that was a big achievement that I managed to accomplish for Kane and Fetterly.
And I think that's awesome because, certainly websites back then, 16 years ago, weren't exactly what they are today, and the marketing arm and the marketing efforts that go along with it was very different back then too. So I kind of want to jump into the marketing side of it, and kind of maybe Bridget from the early days to maybe Paolo today. What's been the major differences, or maybe what's been the most consistent in what works?
Okay, well, definitely in the past and what continues today is community involvement, being in the community, volunteering, fundraising, going to spaghetti dinners, just being with people and enjoying being with people. I mean, that hasn't changed. Being involved in clubs, like social clubs, for instance, the Kiwanis group, things like that. You still need to do that. But what's changed considerably, Paolo can talk on, is social media.
Yeah, social media has been a challenge, I think, for many people, and I think one of my piece of advice would be when you are faced with a challenge like that, you cannot just stand still. You have to jump into the pool and try to follow the change and embrace the changement. And social media is just, I consider, a different way of communication. So, and as I said before, families and consumers are interacting with us in different ways. It's not anymore the phone. It's they check Facebook. They check on the website if we have reviews. They check your YouTube channel, so you are there or you're not.
Now, Bridget, you mentioned early on in the program about education. Part of what you're trying to do is educate the consumer, educate the public. How are you doing that? What are you trying to educate? What are you trying to teach them, to train them to do? And how are you doing it? Do you see that as a marketing effort?
Yes, I do. And the reason this came about, we do seminars and they're free to the community. And the reason we started doing this was because we saw all the problematics after the funeral. The people who didn't have wills, the people who didn't have life insurance, the people they were just completely disorganized, and it created a lot of headache and stress for families. So I said, we've got to do something about this, and we've got to try to reach some people and tell them, please, you've got to get organized before, because just to give your family peace of mind. So that's when we started doing these series, and we invite people to come with us, like notaries and lawyers and financial advisors, just to try to educate people and help them make wise decisions and be in control.
Now, there's no doubt that the team that surrounds you also has to have some of this knowledge, and the empathy aside, they have to also give guidance and whatever. Now, your team around you that you say you've had for quite a number of years, how do you find them, and what do you look for when you're hiring somebody in your field? I mean,
yes.
they got to be compassionate, but they got to have a few other characteristics.
Yeah. Well, it depends for what job description. So if the person is an embalmer, obviously they have to have a degree, they have to have a diploma.
People skills might be a little less important at that stage.
Well, in a smaller business, however, they're not only doing that, right? So they're still meeting with people, they're still directing funerals, so they're doing a little bit of everything. So they still do need people skills. They're also, it's important that, when we're meeting with a family, sometimes the family has questions about their job and what's happening. So they have to be able to interact with the families, and it becomes a very delicate conversation sometimes. So yes, they need people skills. The rest of the people that we hire, I really look for compassion. I'm not looking at the diploma to start with. I'm looking to see if the person will be able to relate to people, will have intuition, will be creative, will be a good listener. So all those types of qualities. The diploma may come after, but it's not the most important thing for me.
Character before skill.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
And when they're dealing with, do you have to train them? Do you how closely do you monitor them? How closely or how often do you get together to kind of plan together and hear, just in our last remaining moments before we get to break, how involved do you get your team? Are you kind of directing traffic dictator, or is it really everybody talking?
Well, actually, we I have to say that we try to get our team involved and make them a part of our vision, and also it's important that they share our goal to our commitment to give the best possible service to families. And in order to do that, it takes some qualities, and as Bridget said, you have it or you're not. So the other important thing is to make your team a part of the change, because things are changing outside. So you have to involve them and make them understand why we are moving in a certain direction. And that's the key to me, because otherwise they will not follow you.
And you also need to take their suggestions. So you need to listen to your staff. We're good listeners, and we love taking their suggestions and running with them.
Bridget Fetterly and Paolo Bassi of Kane and Fetterly Funeral Home with us this evening on Today's Entrepreneur. After the break, HR specialist Micheline Mayette will come by and talk about human resources, so that's on the way. But first, 7:45. Today's Entrepreneur on CJAD 800, inspiring stories from outstanding business people. Dan Delmar and Fuller Landau's Josh Miller with you for our final episode of the season. And this evening, Bridget Fetterly and Paolo Bassi with us from Kane and Fetterly Funeral Home. And we also welcome Micheline Mayette back, HR specialist with Fuller Landau. Welcome back, Micheline.
Hi.
And Josh, some pretty interesting challenges, I'm sure, in the funeral business when it comes to HR.
Well, and it's not only that, but certainly, employees every day, and the entrepreneur has to deal with their complement of people, and the employees go through some tough times and some grievances. So I guess let's start off, Micheline, about what employers, what entrepreneurs should know, like if one of their employees is going through a tough time or difficult, what's maybe some of the things they should think about when dealing with them?
Yeah, in Quebec, there is a law basically that employers have to give employees a certain amount of time if there is a death within their immediate family. It's not a lot of time. If it's a very close family member, so like a child, a husband, a parent, sibling, the employees are entitled to 5 days off, of which only one is paid. Now, if it's a slightly less immediate family member, so like a grandparent, grandchild, or in-law, they're only entitled to 1 day unpaid. So, and these days have to be taken between the death and the funeral. So it's not a lot of time. At least it's supposed to give them time basically to plan the funeral and attend it. That's really what it's there for. So there's no extra time for grieving or anything. There's a few special circumstances where there's more time that could be available if it's, for example, a suicide, or if it's a result of a criminal act. The law does give more time, but in most cases, like 5 days is the max. So, it really depends on the type of company, but obviously the more time you can give an employee, depending how much time they need, I think the best it is, so, to show your support for this employee's difficult situation.
And I guess if you're fortunate enough or you have the foresight to have created an employee policy manual, which probably not enough entrepreneurs and not enough companies do, then it's something you absolutely have to consider to put in there so that everybody gets treated the same way.
Yeah, basically, if you don't have a written policy, then you would fall back on what's in the normes du travail. So the minimum labor standards is what I guess the policy would be, but a lot of employers do give more time than what the minimum is, and so in that case, yes, it would be a good idea to have a clear policy just to make sure that you treat all of your employees equitably.
Now, what about, because we're, kind of leads to days off that employees take and whatever. What other, days off for sick, for depression, for what have you, and all these fun topics that we're talking about. But employees certainly can go through certain issues, certain personal issues. Maybe what are the things that employers should kind of be on the lookout for?
Yeah, well, sick days. A lot of employees are actually surprised sometimes that there's no obligation for an employer to pay any sick days at all. So any sick days, there's no legal requirement. They can all be unpaid if the employer chooses. A lot of employers obviously do have some paid sick days, so that's really their own choice. A lot of employers are surprised that employees are actually entitled to up to 26 weeks per 12-month period in sick time, unpaid sick time, but up to 26 weeks per 12-month period that they can actually take if need be to deal with an illness.
26 weeks
per 12-month period, yes.
To deal with a major illness.
Usually it's a major illness, but
unpaid, I guess.
Unpaid. Yeah.
Interesting. Lots of rules to follow, and when we come back after the break, we'll talk maybe a little bit more about what happens when the employee abuses the system, or how do you what kind of feedback or monitoring should come into play.
We'll also have Bridget Fetterly and Paolo Bassi's one piece of advice for today's entrepreneur. That's next. 7:56 on today's entrepreneur. Our guests this evening, Bridget Fetterly and Paolo Bassi of Kane and Fetterly Funeral Home, and Micheline Mayette is here, HR specialist with Furla Landau, to talk about human resources.
And we were talking about, the sick days or dealing when an employee is, has grief in the family or something stricken, and what are the rules required. But do you, and certainly with sick days, and what happens if an employee starts to abuse sick days? They kind of fake it. At what point does the employer kind of lose the benefit of the doubt and say, well, maybe they've got to start bringing in a doctor's note, or how on top of it should you stay?
Yeah, employers can definitely request a medical note. Unfortunately, we all know that every time you have a cold or you can't work for whatever reason, you're not necessarily going to ask a medical note for that one day. But if it's, a day every Friday in the summer when it's sunny out, then maybe, if there's a pattern, there's a reason why you're going to want to ask for a medical note for every absence, you can do so. So that's not a problem. And obviously for any more longer term sick leave, then in that case, normally there would be more of a follow-up with the employee where they're submitting medical notes. If the employer offers short-term or long-term disability, then it's also with the insurance company that will help you manage that and manage any potential return to work.
Don't let it go by the wayside. Treat it right away.
Yeah.
Because if you, is it possible if you don't deal with an issue right away, they take X amount of sick days per year, you let it go for a year and a half, could the employee deem it to be, hey, well, that's just normal and that's what my entitlement is?
Yeah, 100%. You set a certain expectation. When you don't say anything, a lot of people think it's because it's okay. They always say no news is good news. So if I keep missing and my employer's not saying anything, then it's probably because it's not a problem. So yeah, definitely you want to be on top of that type of thing, especially if there's a repetitive nature to it.
But it's also okay if it's not you personally sick. The employee could have, their child or their spouse sick, and, it's not them, but they have to take care of them. So I presume does that also fall into their sick days? Yeah,
no, it doesn't fall under their sick days. There's 10 days per year, again, unpaid, that an employee can miss work for not just for their child being ill, but also could be for their education, for their care, or it could be for, again, a parent or spouse for their sick time.
Excellent. Thank you, Micheline. And as we approach our last moment of the show, we'll turn to Paolo and Bridget and ask you each, what would be your one piece of advice for today's entrepreneur?
My piece of advice would be, no matter what your education, always do something you're passionate about. You spend most of your life at work. Your passion will most definitely contribute to your success because people are attracted to a business that has strong convictions.
Excellent. Paolo?
And my piece of advice would be, as business owner or manager to embrace the change and to listen to your staff, because only this way you can build a good team and your customers will benefit from it.
Excellent. And Dan, my quick takeaway is this one word that's popping in my head listening to your whole story, and it's called dedication. And, you know, after so many years in such a not an easy industry, there's no question it takes an absolutely dedicated entrepreneur to make a success out of it. And we certainly see that with Bridget and Paolo.
Bridget Fetterly and Paolo Bassi of Kane and Fetterly, thank you both so much for stopping by CJD this evening.
We thank you.
We thank you.
And Michelle Mayette of Fuller Landau, thanks as well.
Thanks.
And Josh, another season in the books. Our sixth season of Profiling Entrepreneurs here on CJ80. We'll be back in September.
Absolutely, Dan. Looking forward to it. And I wish you a great summer. And all the entrepreneurs out there, make the most. Take your opportunities, make the most of them.
Thanks very much, Josh. We'll see you in September. Don't forget to check them out at flmontreal.com.